Hello and welcome to hopefully one of my many videos. Today I will be breaking down the first principles. With this, I aim to build a ground up systematic philosophy, and to anyone who has any objections or any skeptics, please leave anything of this regard in the comment section, as I would be more than happy to respond with them. And if the objection is good enough and relates to something worthy of speaking of, I'll even make an entire video on it. So, what exactly are the first principles? The first principles are seen as the bedrock to philosophy. They are what is needed to have any experience or knowledge at all. They are often self-evident or analytic, meaning they're true by definition, or they're true that by the fact that saying anything otherwise would lead to absurd conclusions. And I wanted to get into this a little bit. They are by necessity circular in a sense, but circular argumentation is not always invalid. For example, at some point you must appeal to a highest authority, in this case reason, and the only sense in which you can speak against reason is with your own reasoning faculties. Now, on existence. Nothing cannot exist, as nothingness is the negation of being, and for negation of being to be is a contradiction in terms. So there must have always been something. There is reason in being. Through there being, being is intelligible and one can speak of it. And to say that one cannot speak of any being is to speak of being and in a pure negation which negates reason. This is true by necessity, and we can prove it by induction. On identity, a thing is what it is unless changed. This is similar to Newton's first law, just regarding identity. It states that if, for example, in front of you, you have a glass of milk, that this glass of milk will remain and stay a glass of milk, just as it is identical to what it is now, unless changed. This is self-evident, as anything which were to change its identity would itself be a change. Everything has identity, for to speak of a thing without identity is to already give it an identity, and we must also see that there is distinction in identity. For example, one can distinguish grass from trees or glass from bowls. And we can also see that to speak of an other or anything other than identity, one must already give it some meaning or categories, which are what identity necessitates. On reason and cognition, these are all universal, and certain universal affirmations as the self-evident principles are, as we said, the underlying faculties and building blocks for any other later argumentation. And often, complete denial or complete negation of any of these lead to a complete incoherence. For example, the statement, "we can never know what is true," leads to absolute incoherence, as the statement itself must be considered true, as everybody presupposes truth in their statements. And lastly, on the authority of truth. Truth is the absolute, for even if it was not the absolute, the fact that it wouldn't be absolute would then be true and therefore become its absolute. These are kind of what I was talking about with circularity, that it's not circular in the sense that we're using X to prove X, but that to speak against it is already using it within your negation. Oh, and one more thing. I didn't talk about it in my slides here, but you also need, as a first principle, free will. Because if you do not have a free will of the intellect and reason is predetermined, you have no external factor which is not taken into account by its determinism to know what is true and what is false. On causality and order, everything has a reason for its being. This is often referred to as the principle of sufficient reason, for even if something had no reason to be, that itself is still a reason. This again shows affirmation through negation. Secondly, on order, everything has a final order, and everything is something which it is ordered towards, and this goes into the essence of a thing. I'm not going to get into this too much here, as it goes into a bit of metaphysics, which comes later. But essence is the definition of what makes a thing, that which without it a thing becomes something completely separate and loses its identity, and the kind of things which the skeptics use in any discourse. Here's a quote by Aristotle, which I think summarizes this pretty well. "The first principles are known to all, for we cannot reason without them." lastly, to summarize. The first principles are fundamental and prior to experience. This is often referred to as a priori. As stated, they are self-evident, and any objection already uses them, and they are universally presupposed as well as necessary. Now I want to make a distinction between contingency and necessity. Contingency means something which could have not been, and necessity means something which must have been by all cases. This is primarily regarding the first principles and anything regarding truth. In this slideshow, there's some other things I wanted to talk about, mainly the law of non-contradiction, which I didn't get into, but it kind of aligns with identity, that something cannot be X and not X at the same time, that there is a kind of straight, narrow path that, for example, back to my example of the glass of milk, something cannot be a glass of milk and not a glass of milk at identically the same time, for not only is this unfeasible and unthinkable, and for something to be unthinkable, it must be irrational, for in being we have reason, as we've seen before, but it also leads to abhorrent conclusions. And thirdly, on causality and order, everything which is reasonable, and everything in the world has reason through its being and relation. And back to last point, on existence, the necessity that something must exist shows us that at the fundamental level of reality and what is real, we have relation and reason. That even in our thoughts and our discourses and the language we would use to try and negate these facts, we already presuppose relation and reason. And that we have not relation in the sense of how you are related to your mother or your father or your siblings, if you have any, but that relation relies on a kind of underlying fabric of what is real and a kind of underlying mode through which we can talk about and think about things. And to deny this would already presupposing a kind of universal mode, because otherwise, if you truly believe there was no universal mode through which people could understand the same ideas, and that when I say something, you think of the same thing I do, given the correct conditions, it makes no sense, because then why are you debating or talking to anyone about that? I hope this was helpful to any of you. My next video will be on the basics of epistemology. After that, I will have logic, metaphysics, anthropology, ethics, state, so politics and theology lastly. And yeah, once I finish building the rough outlines of my systematic, I will try and deepen it and listen to any objections any of you have. Thank you for watching, and again, if there's anything on your mind, please leave it in the comments. I'm more than happy. This is my first video. I will respond to quite literally anything at this point. Thank you.